Hello and welcome to the Michael Harding podcast. Well, I can tell you it's a queer good day here in Leitrim, in the hills above Loch Allen, looking across at the little white cotton wool clouds just at the top of Schleveneering. You can see the cloud as a line, and then above the cloud, the summit of the mountain comes out on top. It feels very like somewhere in Japan. And closer to me at the edge of the garden is the ash tree that has wonderful berries on it this year. And up beside the patio door beside me, a big bush of wild roses, which have gone over now and the roses are gone, but the rose hip is gorgeous, coming into a lovely red colour. It's I don't know the name of it, to be honest with you, but you'd see it very often around the country. People use it for landscaping because it's very bushy and it has a really big, juicy red hip. Comes at this time of year. Lovely sign of the autumn. And it's a great day here in the hills above Loch Allen. I'm recording these. I was going to talk about Borris House, because I was in Borris House last weekend for the Festival of Ideas. It's a literary festival, but it's a festival of ideas. And instead of having every writer come and just read from their own work and talk about their own book, what they tend to do is put writers together in dialogues. So you'd be asked to do something with somebody else, and it'd be like a dialogue. So you're not necessarily talking about your work directly, but it's where the conversation might go. And I was paired last weekend with Magan. And Manchán is somebody I have a great respect for as a broadcaster. He makes television programs. He's also a writer, and I think he's a thinker. He comes up with ideas because his background is very steeped in the Gaelic culture of this country, and he comes up with wonderful ideas. And he wrote a book last year called 32 Words for a Field. You might have even bought it because it sold. I know it sold fierce well all through last winter. But sometimes you buy a book or you get a book as a gift for Christmas, or you give a book as a gift for Christmas. And sorry about that noise. That was me foot hitting the tripod that the microphone is standing on. I'm actually standing up as I talk to you, but because it's such a lovely day, I feel so energetic. I'm in my bare feet, and the sunlight outside is extraordinary. It's kind of pressurizing the room, and the room is like in shadow because I have the blinds down on one window, and the other window, looks east to the mountain and to the lake. So there's a lovely feel of a cave here at the moment, and there's a lovely glow from the light that's coming in the chinks in the window blinds. And here I am, like standing up because I'm just raring to go in the garden with the strimmer or the lawnmower, or just clipping out bits of gorse or whatever. But I was talking about Magan. Yeah, Manchán, he wrote a great book, and you might have read it or you might have sent it to somebody as a present. It's called 32 Words for a Field. Good title, and he really goes through Irish words in it. And he reflects on how deeply he was imbued with the kind of Celtic culture when he was growing up, from his granny, who was from Kerry. It's a great book. But there's a possibility, if you're like me, that you got it as a gift, or you bought it, and then you read about 10 pages of it, and then you put it down saying, oh, that's very good, I'll read it later, and you never get back to it. Well, I never got back to it until I was doing the Borris Festival of Ideas, coupled with Magan. And so 2 weeks ago, I says to myself, I better read his book. And it's a great book. I found it exciting because, I'll tell you why. He kind of talks about the way that there's words the carried meaning, the carried ideas in the Irish language. And that the value of preserving the language is not just for ideological reasons to make us different culturally from the British and be going around blathering in Irish, but just to know that we have this jewel called the Irish language and that it contains so much stuff. It's almost like, I shouldn't say it's a jewel, I should say that the Irish language is a kind of a big treasure chest. And the treasure chest contains the jewels, and the jewels are the ideas that are in Irish and very precise. And it's almost impossible to translate some of them into English. That's why he says, there's 32 words for a field. Here's what he says at the start of the book. He says, "It was my grandmother, Sheila Humphreys, who taught me Irish, and when I asked her one day what the word for a hole was, she replied, 'Do you mean one dug in the ground by an animal? That's an uchas, or one made by a fish in the sandy riverbed for spawning. That's a seher. Or if it's been hollowed out by the hoofs of beasts and then filled with rain, it's a plobon. Or if a lobster is hiding in one, it's a fah. Or if it's been created as a hideaway by a wild beast, it's a puhas.' That was the moment Manchán realized that the two languages he spoke, Irish and English, required not just different forms of grammar and syntax, but different ways of seeing the world. And that's what got me, that he's talking in this book about the fact that Irish is a different way of seeing the world. And that is close to what I get really excited about, and that is the philosophical view of the world. Probably one of the reasons that keeps me enthusiastic about doing podcasts is I'm trying to share something which is my philosophical view of the world, or the various lenses that I use to make sense of the world. Religion is a lens. If I use a mentor deity as some sort of focus on the inside, if I'm living on the inside, self-reflective, self-aware, conscious, and I'm using a mentor deity from any religion as kind of an anchor, it becomes a lens. Like St. Paul says, it's not me who lives now, but Christ who lives in me. That's okay, that's cool. You don't have to be weird to think that. In fact, it's something you can do as an experiment. And you can do it with any deity from any religion. This is a human activity. That's what I keep saying about religion. Religion is how we have evolved as a species, and there may very well be a hugely important function of this lens, this way of looking at the world, through a religious perspective that actually is good for our mental health. Not because it necessarily corresponds to ultimate reality, even though that may also be a fact. So we're on the inside, we're in a cosmos within which we have to proceed slowly and carefully by our intellect, by rational knowledge and science, but also with the intuition of the human heart, which in itself is a very mysterious way of knowing, where your consciousness falls into your heart and your heart kind of glows outwardly towards other beings, sentient beings, be the animals, or be it the trees, or be the human beings. This being human needs a lens, and to think about the sort of various lenses that we use to engage with the world around us brings us into the area of philosophizing. So in some sense, I'm not again, I'm not sort of didactically trying to get across ideas to you, the listener, but I am sharing with you my own private process of philosophizing. This is how I go on when I'm sitting on the chair looking at the beautiful day and the sun shining on the trees and through the trees and given that extraordinary light that comes in shafts in a woodland on a good day. I'm philosophizing. I'm sitting there wondering what the feck is the meaning of it all, in all its beauty. Or I turn on the radio and I listen to, the suffering of the world, the cry of humanity from Afghanistan at the moment is heart-wrenching. It silences me. It silences everybody. That this could be happening in Afghanistan. And you don't have to go to Afghanistan. There's so many other places in the world where it's just a great cry of humanity and suffering. It's hard to reconcile it. It's hard to reconcile it with the joy that you also feel just being alive. And the guilt you feel sometimes that you're the lucky one that is not in a place of suffering. That is a strange effect. It is a terrible effect if you end up in a position of suffering, and then there's another effect. If you're not suffering, you can sometimes feel almost a hidden guilt. How can we be enjoying ourselves? Like, how can we be getting on Ryanair flights going for 2 weeks in the sun in Greece when just close by there are people who are trying in boats to get to Europe from places like Syria, and sometimes falling out of the boat and maybe dying? It's tricky, isn't it? And how can we sit in hotels around the Mediterranean knowing that just down the road a few 100 miles or 1,000 miles there's other people sitting in what they call camps, where they're all in little bunks squashed into sort of tents, and there's no air conditioning there, there's no running water, and there's no showers, and there's no swimming pools. So it's a very, very strange world, and the way that information now allows us to be close, we can't hide our heads anymore in the sand and pretend, well, I don't know the suffering that's out there, because it's on the news every evening. Morning, noon and night we're hearing of the agony of different people in the world, and sometimes even the agony becomes oppressive because it sort of neutralizes your energy to be positive. It neutralizes you to the point that you feel maybe depressed or sad or melancholic, and you don't have the energy to do anything, and then you get dragged down into a sense of morose sadness and sorrow, just because it's all so awful. And in those situations, again, I do feel that in my own personal life, I find it very healing to use what I'd call an interior life, to go to the inside, to go into your heart, on the inside, and pray. And by prayer, I mean visualizing the mentor deity, be it in Buddhism or Christianity, Judaism or Islam, to feel a relationship with the mentor deity, some saint, doesn't matter, anybody, your grandmother, your great-grandfather, somebody that you feel is close to you on the inside, in the world of heaven, in the world of imagination. And when you're in there and you're living with that lens, then it allows you to be sensitive, compassionate to places where there's suffering, and also to do something about it, and also to feel equally joyful in yourself if you are fortunate enough to be in a situation where there's no suffering. Now, I had a year where I had two times in Beaumont Hospital, and I was suffering because I was having operations, but I was also looking at the people in the beds around me, and by God were they suffering. Remember on the first occasion, I was having the first operation, it was last October, and there was a woman in the next bed, and I think she was Romanian, I'm not sure, but I suspect from the sound of her voice she was Romanian, and she was elderly enough, she was very feeble, she could barely get herself with a Zimmer frame, walking aid to and from the bathroom, and she had all sorts of, injecting needles stuck in her arm. I can't think of the right medical word for it, where there's a line, a line in. She had 2 or 3 lines in on her arm for different drips. And there she was, and she had a phone. She had a big phone. And she didn't look, to be honest with you, she didn't look like she had a Rolls Royce or a Mercedes sitting outside either, right? She had a cardigan that she'd put over her pyjamas. She didn't have a dressing gown. It was a big long cardigan, and it was ragged enough. And she'd be sitting there on the bed, and she'd be on the phone, and she used to be on the phone with the screen, FaceTime or Skype, and she'd have the speaker on, so she could hold the phone and look at it like a television, and then when the other people on the other side would be talking, I could hear them. Everybody could hear them. Now, you couldn't understand what they were saying unless you could speak Romanian. But what you could understand is the joy and the love that was on that screen. She had what was obviously children, and then there was other times she obviously was talking to grandchildren. And she would be laughing, and she was laughing like, like you wouldn't think she was in the hospital. You wouldn't think she was anything wrong with her. You wouldn't think there was any lines into her arms at all. She was just like happy as Larry. And she was just glowing in this sense of love. And she didn't feel like, there's an isolated poor person in hospital who's suffering, who's alone, and who's very ill. No, you felt a glow of love from around her. You felt all this energy, and it was just on those, and she didn't do much else now except talk away to her relations. And it just lifted my heart. In fact, it kept me going too. I had my own pleasant moments on FaceTime with the beloved and other people dear to me. But there was something about her open-hearted joy in relation to her family. It came through the language, without even knowing what the words meant. That came through. It's very powerful language in bringing through emotions. And when I think then of, as I say, my philosophical way of looking at the world, I look for lenses. I look for what's the lens through which this person is viewing the world. And then I look at religious practice, ritual, and what I would call living symbolically. And living symbolically is to kind of embody faith. I'm standing here at the moment, I'm looking at an icon. Now, it's an icon of, as I said, I may have said, the Kazan Virgin, Mother of God. It's a particular style. That was painted by a fellow called Yuri Podolin in Warsaw in April of 2016. I know that because April 2016, he wrote the date on the bottom of it. And I know that he did it on one particular occasion when he was working with my beloved wife, who, as a sculptor, was working over there, and she was working on an icon. And the two of them got together one evening, and they were having a chat and having a glass of wine. And this master icon maker did a sketch of an icon on a piece of wood and gave it to her, just to remember the moment. and it hangs in front of me as I speak, and the presence of the Mother of God is in the drawing. It's in what I'm looking at on the piece of wood. It's just so extraordinary, his talent. But there it hangs on the wall, as I say, 5 years later. I'm standing in front of it. If I'm standing in front of it and I'm looking at it as an art object, a beautiful object that was made by this wonderful artist, then I'm looking at it through a certain lens. A lens is kind of like my rational mind, the embodiment of logic and cohesion and comprehension. The embodiment of all that is in the way I'm looking at it, and that's the way I'm embodying a kind of rational view. If I begin to, for a moment, let my consciousness fall down into my heart and feel on the inside a sense of the motherliness of God, feel also the mother of God, the idea that this woman who is completely saying yes to the invitation of God in her life becomes the originator of the Christ. And if you think about Christ, this is in Christian terms now, but if you think of Christ as the originator, in the beginning was the Word, in Arche and Hologos. The Word was in the beginning, and therefrom came creation. Then all creation is like imagining all creation generated from this mother. From this mother's yes to the invitation to be mother of the Christ. Then she's mother of the cosmos, because the Christ brings the cosmos. It's a loop round in history and, in time. When you live on the inside, time falls away. When you live on the inside, you think about the past as being the future you will go to. Because it's outside time. What's on the inside, what's in the heart, remains forever, doesn't go away. So the historical Mary, bringing forth the Christ, is the Christ who is the Word, and the Word is the Word that's there from the beginning, and then the beginning happens, and all being happens, all cosmic reality comes into being. And the originator in this internal, visualized, imagined world, the originator is the Mother of God. So you get this idea that I'm standing here in time, embodying this feeling. So the feeling I'm having in my heart is the core feeling I might have with the perfect mother. Maybe there are fragments of all the different maternal moments I ever experienced. The fragments of all the beautiful, wonderful things I ever experienced from my conception to now in relation to mothering. My birth mother and all the other women who mothered me as a child or held me or even as an adult, the times that we are comforted with a tenderness that we recognize as being motherly. Imagine all that sort of emotion in me, in my body, in my heart. And it's all gathered together. I kind of piece it all together and build out of it one perfect archetype of mother. I build it up from the ground, let's say. You don't have to believe in other worlds or kind of ontological realities outside your own experience. That comes later. That's a different step. That's the step of faith. But all I'm talking about is actually how we constitute ourselves psychologically, how we understand ourselves as human. Human to be here, human to awaken to motherliness. We do it all the time. We do it all the time, especially when we're fragile or worried or anxious. We love the comforting sense of what is motherly. No matter who it comes from. Might come from a man or a woman, but kindness and motherliness particularly gives us a kind of an incarnational sense of love in a tender way. And so I build all that up from my memory, from my past, into a big, perfect archetypal mother. And because I'm living on the inside with this, and because I'm then externalizing it with my body, I'm embodying it. The icon allows me to embody the Mother of God. So it's not that I'm worshipping a piece of wood. It's not that I'm forgetting where the piece of wood came from, an evening of fun and a glass of wine in Warsaw, and the hand of a great talented artist. I know that. I can incorporate that into the moment, but that moment has built itself around my relationship with Mother, and in my embodiment of the love I'm receiving from Mother, the icon becomes the focal, the lens. And around that one single focus point on the wall, I construct the entire universe, everything around me. The lake outside, the mountain beyond the lake, the blue sky, the bit of mist that's coming, the red berries on the ash tree at the end of the garden, and the wild roses up here that are now rose hip. Everything. Or conceptually, if I add in Dublin and Cork and Kerry, and if I think of the coast 100 miles away in Donegal, and if I think of Afghanistan and America and the whole globe and the galaxy and all the other galaxies, then all being is focusing through this lens of the Mother of God icon on the wall, and I am embodying my relationship to Mother. And all that is just me being human. Doesn't prove, you can never prove anything beyond the experience of being human. Now, you'd be asking yourself, what about Manchán? And again, what's the blessing for me in these podcasts is that I get sidetracked and I go off in a different direction. But it was Manchán that started me, because his book, 32 Words for Field, talks very much about the nature of language and how language holds ideas. And I begin to get the idea that the language holds philosophical ideas, ways of seeing. There was one example he gave. It's in the book, but we talked about it on stage at the Borris festival. It was the word irvor. And irvor was the word for a kind of a shell. The word for a kind of a husk, when the life, the seed, the real core of what is living is gone. And then there's there was the irvort, which was the husk. And then there was irvor, he talked about as an emotion of feeling disconnected. So the irvort was what they called, for example, in ancient days, if they thought that somebody was a changeling, that the way there was a story that the fairies would take the person away, and they'd say that's not the real man at all. He's a changeling, and they would put a tongs across the cot when the child was there. If you were leaving the house for a minute to go into the yard to get the eggs from the chickens, you'd put the tongs across, because the tongs would protect the child, it'd stop the fairies taking the child's soul away. You might think this was crazy old superstition, but there was a real sense of an idea here, the idea of your soul or the real you being taken away. Now, just think about how many times we say that about people anyway. You know, we say things like that somebody was not themselves, or that they were just a shell. I was talking to a man this morning and he's just a shell. He's empty. It's like you know when your soul is inside you, and your soul is inside you and it's singing through your body. You're embodying your own soul. But there's other times when you're not. I find it in my life that there have been times where I really walked around without my soul. It was as if my soul had been taken away. It was as if the fairy people had taken away my soul. And you can go around like that sometimes for years. I remember going around, I had a phrase for it at the time. I remember I used to say, I feel my life is going on somewhere else. I said that to myself one time on an afternoon many, many years ago when I was a curate in the institutional church, and there I was as a curate, and it was lunchtime and I was waiting to go back to teach a class in the local school, and I was in the backyard feeding the cats because I had cats at the time, and I was feeding the cats and walking up and down, and I felt so empty, right? So empty in the life I was living as an institutional cleric within the church. And I remember the words came out of my mouth as if somebody else had spoken them. I said, I feel my life is going on somewhere else. And I heard the words coming out of my mouth as if they were coming out of some other mouth. It was as if an angel had spoken them. It was as if somebody had come to me and said, your life is going on somewhere else. Your soul is not inside you. And that was the turning point in my career when I realized there's no time any longer to wait. You must do now what you want to do. And if you think you're going to do some big change in your life next year, well, don't wait until next year. Do it now, do it immediately. I think it was about the 11th of February, around 1984. Might be wrong about that, but I think that's when it was. But I do remember standing in that backyard and the words coming out of my mouth, my life is going on somewhere else. And that was enough. So I changed. I went and found the life that I should inhabit in order that my soul would feel settled within me. And there you go. That's an example of how this podcast is not advocating traditional religious behavior, because that's a really deep and personal testimony to the fact that I found my soul by getting out of institutional religion. And it is really deeply true for me. It doesn't mean that that's everybody's journey, but for me it was the big journey, and a wonderful one that I look back on now and so many years later, grateful to God. It's ironic, isn't it? Grateful to God, grateful to the Mother of God that she set me free to be a creative writer and to find my soul as a storyteller, which is what I'm doing now, standing here in front of you, just telling you a story of my life. But that sense of your soul, you know, not being really inside you, and you have a sense of emptiness, that's earvocht. There's a word in Irish for it, earvocht. The feeling that, or earvor, I keep mixing up these two. Earvor would be the feeling. The thing you are, the noun, would be earvocht. There was only Irvocht there, you know. There was only a shell. There was only a shell there. And I do know, and you know, that you can meet people who are like a shell. And it's an interesting way to look at difficulties. You can look at difficulties as things that are brought on by other people. You know, that difficulties and suffering are brought on because somebody else is oppressing you. Somebody else is keeping you in a situation. Somebody else is doing this to you or did something to you. And that's a very, very important and valid way to be looking at the human condition, because it helps, especially in therapy, to release you maybe from suffering by becoming aware of it. But there is another add-on to that, the add-on of spiritual pathways. And to get on one of them is to say, is my soul in this? Is my soul awakening in this life, in this particular job, in this particular relationship? And if it's not, then go find your soul so that you're not Irvocht, so that you're not living as a husk, as a shell. And I suppose to be a little bit controversial, I think in a secular world, we tend to normalize living as the shell. We normalize anxiety. We almost normalize unhappiness as if it was a noble existential condition to be lost. And in my personal experience, I suppose what I'm saying is that the religious journey, embodying faith, living on the inside, are actually antidotes to anxiety just as much as tablets or therapy. They can be a powerful antidote. That's just my experience. And Irvor has another meaning which is a first cousin of that meaning. The first meaning of Irvocht is like the shell. Something is like the shell from which the life has gone, or the soul has gone. But there's another word, Irvor, as an emotion, as a feeling you have. You know, vi Irvor orm. And that Manchán explained, Manchán Magan in Borris' house, this is who we're talking about all the time, but he explained that Irvor is, wait till you hear this, the loneliness that you feel sometimes at dawn. The feeling that you're disconnected and you're longing for something that you can't quite name. And I was saying to him, I thought this was really beautiful, like an amazing word, because it contained, as far as I was concerned, a real sense of spiritual longing. My soul is longing for the Lord, more than watchman for daybreak, Irvor. And it is embodied in us. There is an embodiment of this longing, which is just called Irvor in Irish. But you don't have to speak Irish to know it. And it's not a bad feeling. It's not like you're a shell, but it's like some part of your soul is outside you. You look at the dawn. It's a miraculous day. I wrote about this in What is Beautiful in the Sky. I sorted that book out and grounded it on a particular day, the 8th of June, 2020. And the dawn, the book opens at about, 5 o'clock, very early in the dawn of that day. And sensing what is beautiful in the sky, sensing what is there's just something extraordinary happens at dawn. If you pay attention to it, if you get up and are there, present to it, you'll have an amazing experience. And it's an experience that feels like there's something out there in the dawn that is actually the ground of what's inside you in your soul. And there's something like, it feels like your soul is longing for something that's just out there in the dawn. There's a presence in the dawn. There's a presence as the day breaks. There's a presence in the mountain or anything. In any city, on any balcony, in any street. We've often had this experience in streets in Dublin at very early dawn can be absolutely amazing. And there's sacred sense of what's beautiful just arising. And you get it in poems, Wordsworth, talking about London Bridge and other poems, beautiful poems about dawn. So this is an extraordinary time, and I'm really constructing the way I feel about it, and it's like your soul, what's unnameable inside you, feels called and longs for something that's out there in the root of the dawn. And that's a kind of loneliness, but it's a very beautiful loneliness because it's a longing. It's a loneliness that is longing. My soul is longing for the Lord more than watchman for daybreak. You can't get this feeling in the middle of the day. You can't get this feeling once you've had breakfast. Once the sausages have gone into your belly, or the cup of coffee. It breaks the fast. It breaks the fast that has put your bodily senses asleep, and so your soul is awake in a way more strongly than maybe in the middle of the day when you're tied up with secular, ordinary business and mundane events and transactions with other people. But at dawn, as you wake, before you break your fast, before your body awakens to the mundane and the banal, your soul is wandering. And if you allow your body to embody and wander and listen, at dawn you will find a longing inside you, a sense of disconnectedness from some mysterious otherness that's out there. And that is what's called Irvor. They've a word for it in Irish. All those centuries, and they've a word for it. And how amazing that the word could be forgotten. And if the word is forgotten, sometimes the experience that goes with the word is no longer accessible, because the words are what make the experience accessible to us. And that's the whole shape of power and mystery that I found in Manchán's book, Manchán Magan. Not all the words are not about, big philosophical ideas. He has wonderful words. Like there's a lopine. A lopine is a word they had for the cloth that you'd put around the claw of a hen to prevent the hen scratching some other hen's eyes out. A lopine, a little kind of sock you'd put on the hen. So he has funny words and really charming words and technical words for the craft of farming and agriculture. And when you see the word and you look at the word, it brings you into the craft aspects of agriculture or relationships. And he tells his own story, how he grew up really steeped in the Irish language, but he also opens a door into the language which is different from any door that you've ever experienced before. And here's the way he does it. He doesn't make you feel like, God, I should be learning Irish. It's not a book that feels like, God, it's terrible that I didn't learn Irish properly. it's a book that allows you access to the language and to the mysteries of the language without even learning the language. And that, I think, is new. And that may be part of the future, because it may be that the language might be something we go to as we go to a dictionary, to be familiar with words in order to be familiar with the ideas behind the words, knowing that the English language doesn't have the words for some of the extraordinarily sacramental experiences that were buzzing around in 7th, 8th, 9th century Ireland. So, all in all, it's just a wonderful, terrific read. And it's a book that you read in bits and pieces, like a reference book. And for me, as I say, I got a great buzz from being at the Borris Festival, because Manchán's work, it helped me again think about the way that words or language are a lens that they embody. And I'm always looking for the lens. I'm always looking for the way that our mundane physical life is embodiment of the soul. That would be it. I remember the first podcast where I started to slip into this religious blather, and it was in the summer of last year, 2020. And I remember the first one where I couldn't resist talking about it. It was about the soul. And here I am a year later, and I'm still enthusiastically talking about the soul and how our bodies embody the soul. How if we lose the soul, we know we are a shell. And if we say it to ourselves, we will change our life in order to re-embody the soul. And the irver, the loneliness that the soul itself feels for the magnificent union with whatever is there in being at dawn. That is why monks all over the world and in every tradition pray at dawn. They'll tell you in Buddhism that the two key times to meditate or pray or do puja or various rituals, one is dawn and one is sunset. When the light is changing from darkness to light or from light to darkness, these are the powerful moments for the soul to hear a deeper voice in the cosmos, in the nature around you, to hear the longing in your heart, the irvor, the loneliness in your heart that feels lonely, restless, uneasy until it rests in whatever is out there. And these are human conditions. These are not, this is not a kind of a construct of a hocus pocus unreality. I'm talking about this from the human side, from the mundane side. This is who we are as ordinary humans. And this is how we feel. If we awaken before breakfast and pay attention to the dawn. And as I say, monks have done it in Buddhist, Islamic, Sufi, Christian, Jewish, for thousands of years, have known that there is a real heightened attention in the soul to the mystery of being. And they embody it in all sorts of morning prayers. A morning prayer, there's no harm to it. It's of great benefit. And certainly, when you're lucky enough, fortunate enough, every so often to have a moment where you can pay attention to the wonderful presence in the dawn, that's very beneficial, I find. And I suppose in Ireland, it may be why there's such a continuum of spiritual awakening in Irish from Druidic times to early Christian times, and I believe there'll be another future wave of kind of awakening of the spirit in Ireland. I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that our twilight zone is longer and more varied and more magnificent than other countries. If you're living on the close to the Mediterranean or in Florida or somewhere, you find that it's light one moment and then the darkness comes like quite dramatically. You'd be at the dinner table in Florida or maybe 6 o'clock of an evening, and it seems bright outside, and you're chatting away, and you're looking at your plate, and you eat your dinner, and then you look up and you look out the window again, and all you see is the lights of the city, because suddenly it's completely dark. Or what's called complete darkness in an urban area. Whereas in Ireland, it's just extraordinary. There's no point in talking about it. I'd have to do another podcast on the strangely beautiful, slow, gradual shift from light to darkness and back again. And then all the varieties of that, the summer solstice, watching the sun crossing the north and that beautiful white light going across the north so that it actually never gets dark. And the midwinter times where it kind of aches and stretches to give you a bit of sunlight. By 12 o'clock in the day, it's kind of at its best, and then by 3 o'clock, you can feel the change coming, the darkness coming. So those times are always going to be sacred times to connect with. One of the exciting things I like about the autumn, when it comes to the end of August, is we're almost at the equinox. We're almost at the halfway point. Believe it or not, from the 22nd of June to the 22nd of December, we're nearly there when we get into September and start looking towards the equinox of the 22nd, 21st of September. So one of the things I rejoice in Ireland is this endless cycle from one season to the next as a play of light, a play of what is there in the mystery of the universe as it presents itself to me, and what's there in my heart as Irvor, as a loneliness and a longing for my soul to be united with whatever this mystery is ultimately. It is like a mother. It calls me home. It never lets go. Through every cycle of the season and the year, the tenderness of mother is holding me. Thank you, Manchán, for saving that word, Irvor. And thank you, Manchán, for a beautiful book. 32 words for field. And thank you, my dear friends, for being here and for listening. In these podcasts, I hope they are of some help to allow you to philosophize a little bit, because I assure you, these podcasts and your presence does an enormous amount for me. Thank you, and bye-bye.